The description of this project is a primarily balsa wood glider that must fit within a 16 by 16 box and must be launched via hand, must remain intact throughout the entire process and fly past 20 feet. For the measures of success, they're the same as the requirements, except that the flight must be at least 20 feet, and for our own measure of success an extra 5 feet in case of bad conditions or a bad throw. You must also have the ability to captivate interest and demonstrate thinking outside of the box. So we have two alternatives in this project. One is Mark 1 as seen here, which is an upscaled version of the balsa wood replica of the famous paper airplane Nakamura Lock. And the second is Mark 2, the final design, which is an upscaled version of the Nakamura Lock, with cutouts and redistributions. Let's discover the three main ideas that cover both of these materials. So for materials, this one is an all balsa wood, no hole design, just like the Nakamura Lock, with its all paper except it's all balsa wood. It has a tail configuration, a small wedge underneath the plane for vertical stabilizer, and adhesive tape for easy readjustment. As for the bigger plane, it's a material of balsa wood frame with a paper skin. Its tail configuration is also wedge but bigger, and its adhesive is liquid Gorilla Glue. Now let's discuss pros and cons. For alternative 1, the initial design, it's a solid balsa wood that removes structural issues, yeah, so you don't have to think much about the trusses, except that the only con is that the solid wing could add a lot of weight and counteract the small positive lift benefits. Its tail configuration is a small vertical stabilizer that could reduce weight, but except that the small vertical stabilizer would not be effective for its comparatively small size for the larger aircraft, and thus lead to large yaw motion. The adhesives, where the tape could be easily readjusted, could always be its downfall, since tape could also be unstable and lead to wing fluttering, which is a performance issue. For the second alternative, we have a redistributed wing mass that could lead to the same CG with less material at the tip. Except that you need to spend time making a structurally sound truss, so the wing structure, that may or may not work, so that adds uncertainty. Also, underneath you can see that it has a bigger tail section, a bigger ratio to the wing surface area, to make less yaw motion, but the bigger tail could also add weight. And the glue is structurally sound and light, however the glue cannot be readjusted unlike the tape. So for probability, for the third choice in all categories, so a mixture of all of these, we would consider that to be a mixture of alternatives 1 and 2, but we wouldn't really consider that. So for example, for the materials, so say that was mostly balsa with some small holes, that wouldn't provide any structural benefit and would only add more weight. The tail configuration, so a medium wedge, would perhaps not be enough lateral control, and adhesive of both glue and tape would add too much weight to the structure, and thus, for the third choice, the mixture for all three categories would not be a good choice. The success, both of these are going to be made since they're relatively easy to make, and if you divide the throws by successful throws, where successful being past 25 feet by our standards, then that's going to be the one design that's going to make it off to takeoff, to the glide-off day. Now for sizing, the alternative 1 is modeled after the Nakamura Lock, almost an exact one-to-one replica, since we need to build paper airplanes to test everything, and we figured that since this one was the one with the readjustable tape adhesive, and also since both are monomaterials, meaning that they don't use other types of materials in the design, then we figured that this one would be the best one to use. So our design process of it, as you can see from the video on the screen now, it had low flight time, low aspect ratio, and low surface area, which might have contributed to its downward spiral, and low glide ratio. It caused unforeseen bad flight dynamics whenever we made it with balsa wood instead of paper airplane design, like the one of the paper airplane, the Nakamura Lock, because it had a higher weight to surface area ratio since it's made of balsa wood instead of paper. And since it's taped as seen in the video, it might have led to wing fluttering and loss of stability in the high-speed throws at high angles of attack. So the pro of it is, though, that it still met the 30 feet mark, and at 20 attempts it had 85% probability of success based on 17 out of 20 throws being successful. And so let's talk about what to improve on. So we could make a larger wing area with slightly higher dihedral, and this will create some kind of more lift and stability. We'll introduce more dihedral, which will also produce that lateral stability that we're looking for, along with an additional yaw stability within a bigger plane, or a bigger tail section, excuse me, a bigger wedge underneath the plane. So for sizing, let's also upscale it so that we get more lift, so bigger surface area. To meet the 16 inches perimeter, tip to tail will now still be, 16 inches. So we'll keep the same aspect ratio, just scale it up, till the tip to chord is just 16 inches. So for the core to chord, as you can see, it's balanced, but since we removed mass from the triangular truss structure from before, as seen here, then we're also going to be reducing weight from the Play-Doh, and we're still shaping as triangle truss also to distribute the shock upon landing, which is why even though the balsa wood is quite brittle, it will still stay intact after such high speeds, and the Play-Doh also helps to absorb and soften the shock. And in our calculations, if we're given weight, wing area, wingspan, aspect ratio, and the velocity, and we know that the Oswald factor is about 0.9, then we could get our coefficient of lift, at which point we could get our coefficient of drag induced. And given that our zero lift drag coefficient is equal to the coefficient of drag induced, then we could double up our coefficient of drag induced to get the coefficient of drag. And those numbers are found in the bottom left. Now, the reason why these numbers might be so small is because of our wing geometry. And if we were to compare it to other students' glider projects, then we notice that both the coefficient of lift, while yes, is much smaller, the coefficient of drag induced, and subsequently the coefficient of drag total, are both extremely small. And with all these design iterations in mind, we go much farther with a much smoother flight at 60 feet for our best flight. On launch-off day, despite design iterations, we still run into problems. The higher initial velocity from the jog creates into a high rolling moment, where perhaps the airfoil is not perfectly symmetrical or it's an imperfect throw, and it quickly rolls out of control and topples into the ground. Also, the throw may have been imperfect, where a user may have thrown directly at the ground on accident. The distance is 28 feet. So for requirements, it still met the requirements at 28 feet, which is an additional 3 feet past our own 25-foot requirement. It's still inside the 16 by 16 inch box, plain intact, and met our personal goals of success, captivating many AE students with out-of-the-box thinking with the paper airplane design. Some summary and final thoughts. I would say that it was probably overall unstable at high speeds, high angles of attack, which I did not like. However, I did like how it still met requirements and captivated interests. So for improvements on those final thoughts and summary, try more dihedral for lateral stability and throw slower at lower angle of attack, and make the wedge or tail section out of hollow balsa wood truss structure and paper skin as well for lower tail weight. Special thanks to NASA's Incorrect Theories article series 1, 2, and 3, as it cleared up many misconceptions, along with NASA's free interactive applets.